all have enjoyed your dinner. And I also hope that you've been inspired and informed by the conference thus far. We'd like to thank and recognize the Center for Leadership and Ethics major donors, John D. Fosk, Richard Goodall, the E. Stewart James Grant Charitable Trust, the Leona Mason Trust, G. Gilmer Minor III, and the Science Applications International Corporation for their great support of our mission and of this conference. I'd also like to extend a personal thanks to the members of the VMI's Faculty Service Committee who helped us plan this conference. Our keynote speaker, Cathy Tisdale, embodies the conference's theme of honor and service, leaders responding to the needs of their time. Throughout her professional and personal life, Cathy has repeatedly supplied needed answers to many Americans who are in true need. During 27 years of service at the local, regional, and national levels, Cathy served in the American Red Cross, one of our country's foremost organizations for responding promptly to citizens' needs during times of crisis. Subsequently, she joined the national leadership of the Girl Scouts, where she shepherded the organization through some groundbreaking reorganizations. In 2010, Cathy continued in her dedication to developing future leaders of action when she was appointed President and CEO of Campfire National Headquarters. Now, for those of you who don't know, Campfire is an organization dedicated to helping our youth and teens build essential life skills. Campfire believes that today's younger generations want to shape the world now and in the future. Campfire provides the experience everyone needs to discover who they are, sort of their inner spark, if you would, for becoming that leader here and now. Our keynote speaker has long role modeled service and leadership and dedicated herself to igniting those very same sparks in others. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cathy Tisdale.
But I think y'all do. Well, just hang on a second. There. Back one. There we go. First of all, I have to tell you that it is an honor and a privilege to have been invited to be here tonight. A gathering like this, you could have secured any kind of leader from any sector to be with you. And so I cannot thank enough General P and Colonel Gray for selecting me to do this. I want to thank Major Kim Connolly for being a gracious hostess and guide over the last couple of days. And I cannot thank enough Rhonda Dove for all the work that she did in advance with my staff and me to make it very easy for me to be here tonight. So if I mess up, please know it's not the general's fault, the colonel's fault, the major's fault, or Rhonda's fault. It's like all on me. But here was the great thing that I didn't know was going to happen, and I found out last night at dinner. I did not know that General John Jumper was going to be here this week. And General Jumper and I worked together when I was the Red Cross CEO in Nevada, and he was base command at Nellis Air Force Base. Now, many of you will know that there are certain base and post commands that whoever gets it, and I'm of an age where it was like mostly white guys, but it's getting better. But you always knew that if whoever was the command in that particular base or post was going to really advance in their careers in whatever branch of service. So when I had the opportunity to know then Colonel Jumper, now General Jumper, he was on our board of directors as an ex officio member. He was an incredible colleague. I learned a lot from him. We have great memories of what it's like when you are the commander of a base like Nellis, doing the kinds of things that happen out there, particularly in the state of Nevada. And so it was just a special treat, General Jumper, to know that I was going to get to see you this week as well. So America has been and remains in very good hands. Now, my opportunity tonight is to talk to you about leadership, but this is a very unique year for this leadership conference because you're really celebrating and honoring in the rule of 3. Science says, by the way, adults can only remember 3 of anything. So this is a very unique year. It is the 50th anniversary of the death of Jonathan Daniels, who died doing something he believed in deeply. It is the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma, and it is the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act in this country. And tomorrow, you will honor Congressman John Lewis. And so, in thinking about how to talk about leadership to you tonight, it didn't feel right to me to talk about leadership in a very academic way, to sort of just talk to you about principles of leadership that are universal no matter whether you are leading in uniform or leading in some part of the civilian sector. What seemed important to me was to think about leadership from the standpoint of leaders who have led within a social movement, who have created lasting change in this country, and how those leadership principles are as meaningful to us, whether we lead in uniform, we lead outside of uniform, and whether we lead with or without a title. So that was how I thought about what I wanted to talk about, is what does that mean? Because this is a unique moment at VMI, and you are honoring someone tomorrow who has been willing to give his life in service to this country outside of uniform and continues to be a powerful voice for all of us as a member of the United States Congress. So, I was trying to figure out how to name my remarks. Rhonda told my assistant that I had until February 22nd to give my remarks a title. Now, I knew what I wanted to say, but I didn't know how to title them, and I was not feeling inspired. I just couldn't, it just wasn't coming to me. So it is Friday, February 20th, and I have been in D.C., Washington, D.C., for meetings all week long, and I get back to Kansas City, Missouri, which is where we're headquartered, and I land at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and I've got to go meet with a group of our affiliate CEOs who are in town for a big conference. And here's what I'm thinking, and I'm just going to be honest, because we're like, okay, can we just be friends and family now? Kind of like Sprint, but not exactly. I'm thinking I want a stiff gin and tonic with extra lime, and then I want to go home and just put my feet up. Well, but I'm going to have a drink first with some. Well, then they say to me, we need to meet with you. Well, when people at the end of a week, at the end of a day say, we need to meet with you, it's almost never good. And so I thought, well, okay, we'll meet. And it was a very intense discussion. It was respectful, it was not negative, but they had some things on their mind. And it was at the end of the day, at the end of a long week. So I went home at the end of this conversation, and we didn't solve anything, but they said a lot of things that they seem to need to say. And I probably wasn't in the best frame of mind to have that kind of meeting. Because you know how, like, by the time it's like 6 o'clock on Friday night and you've put in a whole week, whether you've been in the classroom or whether you've been in the workplace, like, you're ready to be sort of done. And I was anticipating that stiff gin with the extra lime. The lime, by the way, is for the vitamin C in the fruit, because the federal government says have 3 servings of fruit a day. And they don't tell you how to have it, they just tell you to have it, so I'm flexible. So I get home and I'm trying to decide if I'm frustrated by this conversation, if I'm, what am I? And I thought, get behind what they actually said and try to figure out what they really meant. I mean, think about how many conversations you have with people where what they say to you is just the words they use, but it isn't necessarily what they really mean or what they really feel, and you've got to take a step back. And you've got to really reflect on the conversation to figure out what was behind the words, and that's what I did. And here's what I realized. What I realized was there were 2 things going on. They were scared and they needed hope. They're scared because as a 105-year-old movement, we are going through significant transformative change by intention. And when you're a legacy institution, change is about the hardest thing you can possibly undertake. Well, you're older than we are. You're 1839. We're just 1910. Compared to VMI, we're like children. So it's scary. Change is very frightening to people. And the second part is there is not one of us in this room that from time to time doesn't need to have our hope in our present and future renewed. Whether you're an athlete on the field, whether you're a cadet in the classroom, whether you're in the workplace, sometimes it just seems too big. It just seems too insurmountable, and you need your leader to give you a reason to have hope that it's going to get better, keep eyes forward, and you're going to be fine. And that's what I realized that they wanted. Now it's February 20th. I've got to give a title to my remarks no later than Sunday, February 22nd, to Rhonda. And so I thought, maybe it's something about hope. Maybe it's something about hope. Well, so I Googled the words leadership and hope on this one particular website I like a lot. And lo and behold, who pops up but Napoleon? Now, who'd have thought? He pops up with this quote that a leader, leaders are dealers in hope. Now, he also said that in politics, stupidity is not a handicap. Just saying. So I didn't expect, though, to have Napoleon be reflecting on leaders as dealers in hope. So I thought, that's it. For this speech, at this moment at VMI, with the people you are honoring and remembering this week, it is all about hope. It is absolutely about hope. Because Jonathan Daniels and John Lewis are 2 men who envisioned a future that had yet to happen. It is all about hope. I have to hope there is a different present and future, even if I have never seen it, even if I can't touch it. Because if I can't envision a different present and future, then what is there? And it is very much about hope. And as leaders, whether you are leading in the classroom, whether you are leading on the athletic field, whether we are leaders in the workplace, or whether we are leading in our homes and neighborhoods, very often what people need from us is that sense of hope. If I stay at it, if I keep giving it my best, if I keep working with the team, it's going to get better. And so I thought, that's it. But I didn't want to just quote Napoleon, adorable though he is. I thought, I need to make this personal for this audience. And so I paraphrased him to say, we leaders, period. We dealers in hope. And every one of us in this room are leaders, and every one of us in this room, in our way, are dealers in hope. Because that's what sometimes people need most from us. So that is how we're going to frame our conversation tonight. Now, we want to really think about, as General P and Colonel Gray have talked about, the focus this week being on humanitarian service and humanitarian leadership, not just leadership in the abstract. So what does that really mean? Well, let's use Jonathan Daniels as our true north tonight. He was a leader by anyone's definition, but raise your hand if you can tell me what title. What was his title? Did he have a leadership title? Did he run an organization? Was he running a company? Was he in charge of anything when he went to Mississippi and Alabama? No. No. But would any one of us say that he was not a leader? Absolutely not. He's the epitome of leadership. So what does that mean? Well, Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes, who have been professional colleagues for about 30 years, and they are global experts in leadership and leadership development. They teach at Santa Clara University in California. They've been writing together for about 25 years, and they have a whole body of research and a whole framework around leadership called the Leadership Challenge. They coach Fortune 50, Fortune 100 CEOs. They're doing a lot of work right now in China. And so they have done research over 30 years around what are the attributes of effective leaders. They have interviewed and surveyed more than 1 million people in more than 70 countries. And here is their research question. This is really interesting. This is the research question, and they have built 30 years of research around the answers to this question. You're sitting in a conference room with a group of, it could be students or it could be colleagues, and someone walks into the room and says, "Hello, I'm your new leader." The research question they ask is, when that person walks into the room and says that, what is the first question you want to ask them? And so when they're surveying and interviewing people, they take all of the answers that people give to that question, and from that they've been able to craft sort of their theory around leadership. 2 years ago, they took all of that and they wrote a new book called The 10 Truths of Leadership. It's a little skinny book. It doesn't take long to read. You can get it in the bookstore, download it from Amazon or Kindle or however it is you read. I'm like of an age where I like to hold the book in my hand, but I'm all for the Kindle people too. So it's an easy book to read. But the number one truth about leadership is this: you make a difference. Based on 30 years of research, 1 million people interviewed in more than 70 countries, the number one truth about leadership is that you make a difference. We make a difference. I added a second sentence to it when I do this around the country. I've told Barry Posner, he hasn't put me in a book yet, but you know, there's still time. My second sentence to that is, the only question is, what kind of difference do you want to make? Or what kind of difference do any one of us want to make? We're going to make a difference. What kind of difference do we want to make? So that is the truth number one. Jonathan Daniels graduated from VMI. He went on and defined a career path for himself, but at some point he must have asked himself, what difference do I want to make, and how and where? And he ended up in the Deep South at a time when it was as dangerous for white civil rights activists as it was for African American activists to be in the Deep South. And he paid an ultimate price for it. But my bet is, if he could come back to us today, he would tell us he would not have changed a thing. He defined his purpose, and he acted on his purpose. Now, another body of research that I like a lot is the work that the Gallup organization has done about workplace behavior. Their research says, and most of their research is US-based. In American workplaces today, only 37% of workers feel connected to the mission and purpose of their employer. And it doesn't matter if it's public service, private sector, or my sector, the social sector. Only 37% of people feel connected. And why is that? Because they don't feel engaged by their leadership. So Gallup's research, they surveyed 10,000 people who self-defined as followers. They didn't define themselves as leaders, they defined themselves as followers. And they asked these 10,000 people, what are the words that you would use to describe the most influential leaders in your life? And they didn't even define what aspect of leadership. It could be your clergy, it could be from your school, it could be your employer. They were very broad in how they asked the question. What are the words you would use to describe the leaders who've been most influential in your life? 10,000 people surveyed. There are more than 170,000 words in the English language. So 10,000 people had apparently a choice of 170,000 words, and that's just the English language. Out of all of that, 25 words kind of rose to the top out of 170,000. 25 words. Out of the 25 words, four were the 4 words that were most common among those 10,000. Now I'm going to give you 2 of them because they aren't as obvious as you might think, and then we're going to do a shout out and see who can come up with the other 2. One of them was compassion, and a second one was stability, and I'll come back and say a word about what that meant. But there were 4. These are 10,000 people across the U.S. who define themselves as followers in organizations. They said stability and compassion. 2 more. Shout out. What do you think the other 2 were? Honesty. Well, honesty's close. Trust. Check. Courage. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. We leaders, we dealers in... Hope. Thank you. Hope. Hope was the 4th word. It was compassion, stability, trust, and hope. And in a sentence, if you boil all their research way down, here's what that means. So compassion is whether you're a cadet in the classroom or whether you're a worker in an organization or a company, is my leader or my professor or my counselor, are they interested in me as a person, as a human being, or am I only an end product for them? And what followers want is to have the leader care about them as people. So if you're in the workplace or whether you're in the classroom, here's what that means. The very first words out of your mouth shouldn't be, did you get the project done? Did you get the assignment completed? It might be, how was your weekend? You know, how was skiing? How was whatever it is you did? Can we just take 5 or 7 minutes to have a one-to-one conversation? And that's what people want today. They want to be seen as people, not just an end product, whether you're in the workplace or you're still on a college campus. So that's the compassion piece. And it needs to feel genuine. If it's fake, you know, we all know fake. Like, have you ever had somebody say to you, how you doing? And then they go right into what they really want to say. It was kind of like, you didn't really care how it was. Did you read a script and think that's the first sentence you're supposed to say so that you can then really get from me what you really wanted from me? So that's compassion. Stability is this. There is so little stability in our society today. Families struggle to make it. I asked someone yesterday, how many of you here will graduate with student loan, which is enough to almost make you lose your dinner. But for those of you who will not commission, a significant number of you are going to graduate with student loan. That's unsettling to graduate with student loan. And know that no matter what job you get once you graduate, you're paying back for some period of time. And for many people, it can be 10 years. So there's that kind of economic instability. There is instability in the workplace. Companies are laying people off every day quietly or with fanfare. They're creating new jobs that people may not be yet qualified for. There is instability on university campuses because university campuses rely on state and private funding. There is instability in my sector because we're relying on funding from a variety of sources, and there are a lot of great causes out there that people can give to. So there's a lot of instability. So what we want, whether we're on the college campus or whether we're in the workplace, is just tell me that if I work hard, I do my job, I'm a good team player, that it's going to all even out, that things will start to sort of stabilize, and I kind of know what to predict for myself or for my family. So that's stability. Trust in any survey. When Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes identify their 20 characteristics, which they've been surveying around for 30 years, in the top 3 is trust. By the way, among their top 4, honesty is also one of their top 4 or 5. But it's trust. And by the way, trust is different than credibility. You can be credible and not be trustworthy. And here's how we as citizens know that. We elect people to represent us in Washington as members of Congress, or we elect someone to go to the White House. They're credible. They had a resume. Maybe they ran the best campaign and we elected them. So they're credible. They have some sort of knowledge or experience. But look at the polls over the last 5 years. 20 and 25% of people in this country find our elected officials in Washington trustworthy. We may find them credible. We do not find them trustworthy. What happens when your leader is not trustworthy? You're not following them because you don't believe them. You only do what you have to do, and then you do a workaround. You figure out how to get around them. So trust in our leaders is everything. We will walk on hot coals for a leader who is trustworthy and credible to us. And then the 4th is around hope. When times are tough, whether it's the coach of our team, whether it's the professor in our classroom, whether it's our leader in an organization, when times are tough, if that leader inspires hope, if they can communicate this forward look for us that we can believe in, we'll stay focused and we'll stay with it. But when we lose hope that it can ever be anything other than it is right now, we give up. So when I think about, Jonathan Daniels and Congressman Lewis, they had hope. They trusted in something that they had never yet seen. Most of us will not be called upon to do what they chose to do, but I think about that as the hallmarks of leadership. And they did it without titles. They did it without being in charge of sort of anything. They did it because the hallmark of leadership is not the title. And by the way, when you survey young people in high school, middle school, and high school, only 1/3 of kids in high school aspire to positional leadership, only 1/3. You survey that same group of kids and you ask them, can you change the world? 85% of young people believe they can change the world right now. They just don't think they have to have a title to do it, which is probably a good thing because there's just so many titles to go around. So let's talk a little bit more about what I would call the 5 elements of leadership. And again, what I want to say to you are the elements of leadership that are critical in the leadership within a social movement, which is what you're honoring tomorrow in honoring Congressman Lewis. It is what you validate when you continue to memorialize Jonathan Daniels. You're talking about people who led within a social movement. Many would say the civil rights movement is the most important movement of the 20th century. But the same elements of leadership that they exhibited are the same elements every single one of us need to exhibit in the classroom, on the field, and in whatever endeavor we allow for ourselves professionally. So first of all, there's a leader in every one of us, and the science and the evidence is really clear about that. I mean, the research is abundantly clear. Because what we have to do is understand what leadership really is. Here's what leadership is. Leadership is being trustworthy. Leadership is being transparent. Leadership is being honest. Leadership is showing up. Leadership is having a kind of an idea of how something could be better. Leadership is following through. Those are all the characteristics of leaders. And everyone in this room exhibits those characteristics every day. Whether you see yourself as a positional leader or not, that's leadership. There's a leader in every one of us. If we show up and we follow through, we're exhibiting the hallmarks of leadership no matter whether we have a title or not. Every one of us wants a voice. We want a voice in those things that directly impact us, and we want a voice in the world around us. At Campfire, we call that youth voice and youth choice. So here's what that means in Campfire land. And we work with kids ages 5 to 17. So youth voice and youth choice for us means this: every kid at every age has the right and the responsibility to have a voice in those things that affect him or her and in the things that affect the world around them. Our job is to help them learn how to lift their voice in an effective way and how to be their own best advocate. But there is not a time in our lives when we don't want that also. So whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in the workplace, our voice needs to matter. So a third element of leadership, and it was profound over the course of the civil rights movement, is that we have to encourage what I call a constructive conflict of ideas. Now, I use the term constructive because in Washington right now there is an amazing array of conflict of ideas. But I'm not sure we would all say it's constructive because it doesn't seem to be moving us forward. In fact, I've never seen so many rules exercised in my life, unless you know Robert's Rules of Orders backwards and forwards, to preclude any good decision from actually happening. So a constructive conflict of ideas should be encouraged. General P every day comes in, and he and his administration have a vision for how VMI can be the very best institution it can possibly be, how it can live every day its mission, vision, and values. But if he encourages a constructive conflict of ideas, we're not arguing about the end game, we're simply arguing about the best way to get there. And in the civil rights movement, if you think about John Lewis, who was about 20 in 1964-65, John Lewis was part of the emerging group of young activists who were all about black power. I mean, we're, afros. I mean, you don't see an afro. You will not find a picture of Ralph Abernathy or Martin Luther King with an afro. You just won't. And if you do, somebody photoshopped. So you've got this young, emerging group of civil rights activists who were very much about black power and about being much more aggressive and much more assertive in the way they spoke about the march towards civil rights. And they were here, and you had Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and others who were still over here, focused on Gandhi's principles of nonviolent response. Now, neither was wrong, but they both wanted the same thing. Both groups of people wanted the same thing. So the leaders in those cohorts said, we're going to encourage this constructive conflict around the ideas because we're all focused on the same end game, which is every person in this country should have an equitable right to vote. Every person in this country should have the right for a higher education. Every person in this country should have a right to transportation. Every person in this country should have a right to live where they want to live, and every person in this country should have a right to go to any hotel and any restaurant that they so choose, and oh, by the way, drink from whatever water fountain you can find, because the water in a water fountain is horrible anyway, but have at it. So it was a constructive conflict of ideas, and they found a way ultimately to work together. In addition, number 4, this is a legacy institution, and I lead a legacy organization. And I came out of the Red Cross, which is a legacy organization, and the Girl Scouts was a legacy organization. The upside of a legacy organization is that there is a tradition upon which to build. The downside is you can think the future is the present. So for those of us in this room as leaders and emerging leaders, we need to see the future that is not yet. We cannot be satisfied with the status quo. Change in society doesn't happen if we just say, well, you know, that's kind of the way it is. We can't envision anything any differently. So, for example, it can't be any different. There will never be a woman in one of the service academies. Oh, no, wait, General Halstead, excuse me, a woman, West Point. Oh, well, but wait a minute. There'll never be a woman who makes flag officer or general officer rank. That could never happen. Oh, no, wait, General Becky Halstead, first woman out of West Point to be appointed general officer. Yes, but women would never, ever be forward deployed in combat. Oh, no, wait, General Halstead, highest ranking woman to ever be in a combat area. So every time we say the present can only be, that the future can only be the present, all we have to do is look around and see how it's changed. There was a point in time when I'll bet you there are, if we could go back to some VMI alums from way back, they would have said there'll never be a woman at VMI. Well, it did take till 1997, but here you all are. There probably was a time when they said there'll never be a cadet of color. Well, here you all are. In Campfire, they said, well, we're girls only. Well, in 1976, we went co-ed. Hey, the world changes. So as leaders, number 4 element of leadership is to see the future, envision the future, and imagine it doesn't have to be your present. And you draw people to it. And then the 5th thing I want to say, which is about legacy. Legacy is our greatest gift, and it is our greatest deterrent. Legacy works for us if we can capture the very best part of a legacy. What is the part of a legacy that is so endemic to our strength that it must be perpetuated? And what part of our legacy is going to hold us back because the world keeps changing? Well, Campfire went co-ed, VMI went co-ed, the service academies not only went co-ed, but there are women who made, you know, general officer and flag rank. When I was at the American Red Cross, at one point in my long career, because I ended up having a bunch of Red Cross CEOs, we kind of went through a bunch of them there in a short period of time, but I worked for Martha Evans, who was only the 2nd or 3rd woman in the Navy to make flag officer. And the first time I met with her, I said, Marty, what did that feel like? You know, because she did not go to the academy. In fact, her father was Navy enlisted. And so when she went into the Navy, she had no aspiration that she would ever be a flag officer. And she thought she had done her career in because she had a particular billet that caused her to have to take on tailhook and to be an advocate for the women in the Navy who were impacted by tailhook. And she was sure that that would end her career. Well, it didn't. She ended up with 2 stars and had a tremendous 28-year career. So our legacy can work for us or it can work against us. But here's when our legacy works for us. Our legacy, and we as leaders have to figure out what part of that legacy we carry forward and what part we have to sort of set aside. At its best, our legacy is our stories. It is our traditions. It is, they define us. They give us hope. They help us preserve our values. And in that way, our legacy is powerful. And when you think about VMI, which is a legacy dating back to 1839, and you're not decreasing student enrollment here. Under General P, you have increased student enrollment at a time when branches of service are not increasing but decreasing their ranks. but you're growing. So there is something powerful about your legacy, about your stories and your traditions that need to be perpetuated. And when we're in leadership roles, we've got to figure that out, and we've got to be able to be the chief storyteller. So let's think about, just for one moment, let's think about your story, your tradition, and the values that you have preserved. Raise your hand if you were on the rat line with Jonathan Daniels. Anybody on the rat line with him? Raise your hand if you sat in a classroom with him, or if you were a professor. Anybody his professor? Raise your hand if once you graduated and got out of uniform and could, hang out. If you drank a beer with him. Anybody? And yet, he has graduated more than 50 years ago. He lost his life 50 years ago, and yet you have preserved his story because it is endemic to your core values. You have memorialized him in a humanitarian award, which will be given tomorrow. And that is the power of legacy, and that's what we have to figure out how to perpetuate as leaders. Now, the young John Lewis, he won't look quite like this tomorrow, but he moves around. If you've met him or heard him speak, he moves around pretty well for a guy his age. The second part of leadership is around the requirements of leadership. And he said every generation has to do its part. That was his requirement for leadership. Every generation has to do its part. And so there's just two things I think I would say to you about that. I could say a lot more, but I won't, and you're probably happy about that. The first requirement of leadership in today's world is that it has to be spirit lifting. A lot of the things that Scott Geller talked about this morning, I was sort of making mental notes because so much of what he talked about I knew was going to be in alignment with the message that I hope that I would leave with you tonight. And part of leadership is spirit lifting. So when we give people hope, when they know that they can trust us, when we give them sort of this look forward, we get knocked down, we get up, we get knocked down, we get up. That is spirit lifting. It is true for adults, and I will tell you that in Campfire, when we're working with economically and academically disadvantaged kids of all ages and their parents, and you see the before their Campfire experience, and you see the post Campfire experience, and you see the difference in how they see themselves, their spirit has been lifted. I can't do it for them. I can only set the table. They got to come to the table and eat on their own. But you can. But as leaders, one of our requirements is we've got to be spirit lifting. This is a tough world, and we've got a lot of challenges no matter where we lead and no matter where we end up. And the second thing is, and this goes back to this whole legacy thing, it's got to be about substance over bureaucracy, and we cannot let rules get in the way of good decisions. I mean, okay, how many times have you heard somebody say, we don't do it that way here? Now, for you cadets, don't nod, because people are in the room that you may need to care about at some point. So, but you've heard it. Well, we don't really do it that way here. Well, that's not the rule. You get into the workforce, and I'm telling you, there's a million reasons you don't do it the way it was ever done. But that is putting bureaucracy and rules over substance, and we've got to stay focused on substance. So if we go back again and we use Jonathan Daniels and John Lewis as a beacon, there was a bureaucracy in the civil rights movement. By the time people like John Lewis came along, I mean, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and some of those folks, they'd been at it for a while. They'd been in and out of jail a few times. There was some bureaucracy. They had a methodology. They had a way that they wanted to try to advance civil rights in this country. Now these young guys and young women come along, well, they don't like that bureaucracy. They didn't like those rules. They wanted to do it differently. So the older leaders of the movement said, we're not going to let our bureaucracy get in the way of the substance. And again, it was that encouraging that constructive conflict of ideas. So it is substance over bureaucracy. It is good decisions over the rules. I really hate rules. I actually think that you only should have enough rules to avoid unmitigated chaos. And then anything more than that is probably too much, but I'm saying that at VMI, and that could be anathema in a place like VMI, because, I mean, y'all sleep on hay. I don't know. So there are some parts of your legacy that your ancestors would be thrilled to know that you still have to do it. But Andrew Westhouse and I had coffee today in that, kind of that great place where you can go get the coffee, and I understand that there are previous generations of VMI cadets who would think that y'all are living La Vida Loca, which I don't know where that means they got their coffee from or whatever, but it must not have been in a nice place like we were in. So I want to go back to the beginning, and I want to say this to all of you. I want to go back to the beginning. Truth number one about leadership: you make a difference. My addition, you only have to decide the difference you want to make. If you're already in the workforce, if you're already in your field of endeavor, I hope that you are in a place where you are committed to the mission and where you feel connected to the purpose. And I hope you have a voice in your present and your future, and I hope you have a voice in the world around you. If we have that, we have a lot going for us. And for you cadets, whether you commission or whether you go into civilian world, and if you go into the civilian world, whether you go into the private sector, and by the way, I'm all for making money. I'm a total capitalist because I'm raising money from you, so have at it. Whether you go into the private sector, whether you go into elected public service, whether you go into the social sector, whether you commission, I hope you find a place to be where you can be connected to the mission, where you feel connected to the purpose, and where you have voice. Our society doesn't have time for you to pay dues. We can't wait for you to be 45 or 50 and suddenly wake up one day and be given a title and suddenly have a voice. Society isn't waiting. The issues of this world aren't waiting. It is today. At Campfire, we say it begins now, and we emphasize now because it isn't what a young person is going to be when they're 18 or 25 or 30. It's, do we know how to show up for our life today? Do we know how to make a difference today? Do we know how to lift our voice today? And so in whatever endeavor you choose, I hope you wait until you find the place where you can feel connected, where you can feel purposeful, and where you can feel that your voice matters. If you do that, all the instability, all the craziness, all the rules, all the bureaucracy will be a whole lot easier to live with than it normally is. And in conclusion, I want to end with this, with a famous Virginian. And I won't read the whole thing to you because you're smart people, you can read it for yourself. But I want to read for you what for me is the most powerful part of what President Wilson said, and it was this: you are here to enrich the world, and you impoverish yourself if you forget the errand. Thank you very much.
Outstanding. Cathy, thank you for inspiring us with hope and motivating us to make a difference every day. So on behalf of the superintendent and the Corps Cadets, if you'll please accept these small tokens of our appreciation, and we're going to take away a lot about leadership from you today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.